Well, thanks, Dirk. Thanks, Trip. Okay, well, good article there, and we have another one here coming up that we covered this week. Turning the third edition of IEC 60601-1 to your advantage. That's the name of an article written by Dale Hallerberg that appeared in Tuesday's issue of Quality Digest Daily. Now, as many of you know, IEC 60601-1 is an International Electrotechnical Commission standard governing the safety and performance of medical devices. Dale's article talks about the specifics of the third edition of the standard, which presents some important changes, as well as the shifting philosophy of this standard and others. Now, author Dale Hallerberg is joining us now via Skype, and we're going to chat with him about the implications of this new edition of IEC 60601-1. Welcome, Dale.
Thank you, and good morning and good afternoon.
Hey there.
Good to have you. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for writing a really interesting, in-depth article. And I want to begin, you began your piece with an interesting take on how and why standards change over time, from the specific and prescriptive to the general and more performance-based. Now, you had a quote, and I think we want to call it up here on our screen share. You had what I thought was a really interesting quote in your article that I think really talks about what this is, and we're gonna share it with our audience here. You write, the philosophy of the third edition of IEC 60601-1 is the manifestation of the next step in the evolution of standards. It requires designers of medical equipment to analyze the hazards and risks that might come from the use of a device, and then design the device to address those risks. Instead of physical requirements or test requirements, the designer has requirements for analyzing the risk of the device and mitigating the safety hazards. This throws open the door to the use of new ideas and technologies that cannot even be predicted at this time. Ultimately, the philosophy of the third edition is intended to encourage novel and improved clinical applications, resulting in better patient outcomes. So, is the third edition of the standard basically about mitigating risk and encouraging innovation, in your mind?
Well, it certainly was designed with the idea and written with the idea to allow faster and cleaner innovation from medical manufacturers. I'm glad that you picked up on that, what I put in the paper, the transition between standards of old and new standards. I always try to look at what's happening in standards for medical devices very philosophically. And this edition of the standard really forces us to do that. As you said, there's been a slow transition through standards from prescriptive, where they told you exactly what to do, to test-based, where you perform some tests, and if you passed, then it was considered fine, to this new philosophy, which is intended to allow greater latitude for manufacturers to come up with new ideas that were never considered, and yet the standard has approaches and risk management considerations that will properly evaluate those products, even though we can't even think what they might be today.
Well, and maybe you can get into it a little more depth, what are some of the specific changes that really help to address these issues? Because, hey, risk, for instance, is something that we're seeing across all standards, across all people in our industry need to be aware of mitigating risk and understanding how quality assurance connects with risk management. So what are the specific protocols or new changes in the standard that really specifically address that?
Yes, so as we mentioned, the intent of the standard was to try to allow new devices. But if you don't know what the new device is going to be, then you need some kind of a process in place that's going to examine what might go wrong with a potential device and how to then mitigate that risk or reduce that risk to an acceptable level. So this is done in this new standard by adopting an ISO standard, ISO 14971. And this is a specific risk management standard for medical devices. And so you need a process in place in your manufacturing, actually in the design environment, that takes a look at every possible outcome and evaluates, well, what is the likelihood of that dangerous outcome happening and what is the severity of it, and comparing these. And if they are above a certain level of risk, where it's an unacceptable risk, then you've got to do something. You have to reduce that risk some way. You have to find a good way to reduce it. So this is the major change in this edition of the standard. We call it the third edition. The second edition briefly touched on risk management, but this third edition really calls for manufacturers to go back to that ISO 14971 document and use it as a structure for a process of risk management in their medical device. And that is, I would say, the largest change between the old edition, the second edition, and this new edition, the third.
So Dale, are you saying that are people going to have to, if you're in the medical device arena, are you going to have to be working with both those standards then, the 60601-1 and the
14971?
14971.
Well, and as well as Dale, I wanted to touch on that as well. How does FDA play into this? How do FDA, how do what you need to do to satisfy the FDA also connect in with both these standards?
Okay, to answer the first question, absolutely. You will have to use both the ISO 14971 as a basis for your risk management processes, as well as the 60601 standard. And those aren't all. The 601 series of standards includes horizontal standards that apply to lots of different devices, and a good example might be electromagnetic compatibility requirements. So those apply to any medical device. And in addition, there are particular standards for clinical modalities, and an electromyogram or an EKG machine, let's say. So there's a whole series of standards beyond just the two which we mentioned, the 14971 risk management and the 60601 base standard. Now, could you go ahead and restate your second question for me?
I was just wondering how FDA regulatory controls fit into that as well.
Yeah. FDA, of course, has some of their own requirements for good manufacturing practices and such. Now, they have traditionally accepted using harmonized standards like this as proof of electrical safety, mechanical safety, these sort of things. And indeed, the FDA has agreed that they will accept using this new version of the standard for products that are now being produced and designed. There's a timetable for transition for that FDA work. They've already said they will accept products. If you design a new product today and you use the third edition, they find that acceptable. And in fact, after June of next year, 2013, you'll have to use this third edition for new products. Now, for old existing products that you're keeping in the manufacturing pipeline, we would say those are being grandfathered in, and the FDA will continue to accept those off into the future, just assuming that, of course, there's a slow and steady obsolescence of those. So at some point, the second edition will just die its own death, if you will. But as of June of next year, you'll need to use this new standard for FDA submittals for new products.
So that's kind of the calendar. That's the timeline going forward. Really, it's mid-year 2013, in which you pretty much have to be adapted to this new edition. Are there milestones along that way that people need to continue the transition?
There's a lot of timetables, and you can imagine that each country has their own timetable. So the Canadians are doing something a little different for the Standards Council of Canada and Health Canada. The US FDA has one timetable. For manufacturers that sell products around the world, it's a very complex and difficult issue. And really, without going into every detail of every country, probably the most important one is the European Union. That requirement is that the third edition standard you must begin to use that by June of this year, and not just for new products, but existing products as well. So the demand for the European application is a much tighter time frame and much more demanding than what the FDA is doing or what the Canadians are doing.
Okay, Dale, thanks for the great information. Unfortunately, we're kind of running out of time on you here. Is more complete information on this timeline and some of the other things you mentioned, is that available either on the ISO website, or in the article itself, or was it in the article? The timeline, was that in the article?
There was, yes. There were some timelines,
Yes,
I believe.
If you'll share that article with your viewers on your website, then I would encourage them to go there and check it out and read it. It's a brief overview, These are very complex issues, and we encourage you to get in touch with TÜV Rheinland North America if you've got further questions. We would be glad to help you out.
That's great. Well, thank you again, Dale Hallerberg, and product manager, testing manager, I believe, Dale, for the medical device testing division of TÜV Rheinland.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us on the show. And yes, Dale is correct. We have the article on our website. It's actually, a link is just below the player right here.
Just below the player also, yeah, there's a link to the article.
So go check that out. And there's a lot of resources. As Dale said, there's a lot of information out there. It's a fairly complex transition, but if you're in that space, you need to be aware of what's going on. So check it out and do your research.
All right. Thanks, Dale.
Thank you, Dale.
All right. So
well, good segment there with Dale of TÜV Rheinland, and yeah, we always want to present to our audience the latest information on standards and transition to new editions.
You know, one thing we didn't ask, maybe I meant to ask. We ran out of time on that. I'm wondering if this is just for implantable medical devices or any medical device.
I believe it's any, but certainly with regard to the electronic elements of medical devices is because it's an IEC standard, so it's
right.
Oh,
true. Yeah.
But it's a very broad. I mean, Dale's right. It's a brief overview he gave, but it's still a rather lengthy article.
Right.
And it's a complex topic. So definitely, again, if you're in that space and you need to be aware of the changes in the standard, get on it and get out to this article as a starting point.
Right.
And then go from there.
And obviously also the IEC website as well.
Yeah. And the ISO website as well for 14971 is
exactly. Yep.
is important. And FDA. I mean, FDA probably has good information on that as well.
Yep. Okay.